Hey friends, and welcome to this week's edition of Roaming Taste Videos. This week we are making Dutch apple tart. Now, I have to be honest here, I travelled all the way to Amsterdam from London a few years ago just to go and get another slice of this before I left to Europe. It's that freaking good. I think this is the king or queen of apple pies. It is super easy. You need a cake tin, not a pie dish for this one because it's really deep. And you can simply press the pastry in if you wish, and you don't need to like lattice the top. That's not usually how it's presented. It's just like laid over, nice and easy. So this is probably like the easiest introduction to making a pie that you could have if you've never made pie before. I would love to know if you give this a go, so add a comment below, tag me on Instagram at Roaming Taste, subscribe for more videos like this, and if you do give it a go, please do follow the link below and add a review so that more people can find this recipe. We want to make sure that that butter is truly well chilled. Usually I cube it and return it to the fridge before I need it. Now we want to begin by sieving our flour and baking powder, hopefully a little bit less messy than what I got here. You can absolutely use self-raising flour instead of just plain flour and baking powder, but this works just as well. They're basically par for par. We want to then stir them together and then add in our beautiful brown sugar and obviously some salt there, but that brown sugar adds such a beautiful color and flavor to this pastry, and I recommend not subbing any other sugar for that beautiful brown sugar. We want to stir that together and make sure there's no lumps remaining in that sugar, and really keeping this mixture as nice and smooth as possible, so that when we then add the cubed butter in, we're cubing that butter into like a nice homogeneous mixture. Once it is all stirred together nicely, we want to make a little well in the center, and then we are pretty much ready to add in our vanilla extract. I do this just before adding the butter because that butter getting sliced through the flour will then mix the flavor through more, and then we are ready for our butter. Now we want to either use a pastry cutter or a knife to incorporate the butter into the flour. What we want to do is make sure that the butter is cut into the flour as finely as possible, that every single bit of butter is coated in flour, so that when it comes to baking it's not at all going to like melt, that it's nicely mixed through. But really what we're aiming for is that the butter is no larger than the size of a pea. Like, there are no pieces of butter in this mixture that are larger than the size of a pea. So this does take a little while, but don't worry, you will kind of get the hang of it. If you're using a pastry cutter, it will be much faster than with a knife, but not all of us have pastry cutters, and that is just fine. A butter knife will work a trick. I definitely recommend holding onto that knife quite firmly because it will just help you get through the mixture more swiftly, and will kind of like help you to feel through for those larger pieces of butter that are like probably hiding underneath all the flour there. Just keep at it until you have the desired texture you're looking for. Now, Dutch apple pie is a bit different from American apple pie in that it is a much higher pie to begin with. It's not baked in a pie dish, and that lattice topping isn't always like woven. You can literally just place the pieces on top, as I will show you later in the video. But also, the origins of apple pie actually go all the way back to as early as 1390 with the British, where they invented it. England has a long history of apples. They have a real love affair with this fruit, and they invented this pie with influences from France, the Ottoman Empire, and the Dutch. So we can see how readily this was then taken up by the Dutch and then it was eventually this dish, an amalgamation of effectively what the English had, what the Dutch had, and then it was brought over to what was then called the New World, aka America, and I think that is how we now have such a love affair in America with apple pie. Once we have added in our butter successfully, we want to add in those 2 eggs. 1 large egg will absolutely be sufficient here. I recommend 2 small eggs. I made this pie 3 times to get this right. I really wanted it to be the best apple pie. I wanted it to be the best version of what I have tasted more than once in Amsterdam, and what you would find on Dutch soil. And so it is a lighter pastry than what people might be used to working with. But once you add in those eggs, it doesn't really take long to incorporate. I find the best way to incorporate pastry dough is to really press it together inside my bowl. If I try to add it to my work surface, if I upturn it, add it to my work surface, it has a much larger surface area that I have to then try and press my pastry into a disc form. So once we have it on our work surface, we want to just press the dough together as much as possible, and then we just want to wrap it and refrigerate it. We want to do that for an hour so that it really has time to rest and all of those ingredients have time to come together and form the pastry that we are needing. Whilst this refrigerates, we have time to prepare our apples. I specifically recommend using Granny Smith apples here because they are considered one of the best by professional bakers, in the sense that they hold up really well when baked, so we don't want any like mushy pie filling here, and they also have a more like tart flavor, so they are fantastic when you add sugar, but they don't become overly sweet. Though if you don't want to just use Granny Smith apples, some great subs are Braeburns or Honeycrisp apples. They are fantastic alternatives, or you could just do a mixture of the 3. I also wanted to show you how we don't want to like cut our apples too fine here. We want them to have a little bit of body and shape, and that's why we cut them roughly into cubes. We cut some bigger than others because the end result in our pie is exactly what we're looking for. We want it to be a little bit rustic, and we want it to be like it's homemade because that's just the best. I'm gonna let you enjoy watching me peel and slice these apples for our filling. So before we do anything else, we want to preheat our oven to 180 degrees Celsius or 350 degrees Fahrenheit. Now we want to add all the other ingredients for our apple pie filling. The semolina, which will help soak up all those juices, the sugar, which will help get some of those juices going, the lemon juice, and that beautiful cinnamon, ground cinnamon just adds so much to this. We want to stir those all together, and that will really help get some of the liquid out of the apple. The lemon juice, the acidity in that, and the sugar will help draw out some of the liquid, which we will ensure we do not add to the filling later when we put it into our pastry. So we want to stir those all together, and then we can set them aside because we are ready to prepare our pastry for our cake tin. One huge thing to note here, when you make a Dutch apple pie, you need a spring form cake tin. It's essential because it'll really help you get the pie out. It's very large, it will take over the entire tin, and a spring form you can literally just unclip it and slide it off. Now we want to cut a third of our pastry away, so you can measure it or you can just eyeball it, up to you, and set that aside. That will be our topping, and then we want to roll our pastry out. I found this pastry, I think this is the first one I did that I videoed, was quite hard to work with because I initially used just plain flour. In the UK, plain flour has very low protein in it, and so bread flour in the UK is equivalent to plain flour in the United States. So I recommend always using bread flour if you're in the UK for pastries. I did that the second and third time, but we'll get to that later. So anyway, we can roll out our pastry, and we want to press it really firmly into our cake tin. We do not want the pastry to be too thick because there is no pre-baking here, and although the pie bakes for a while, if it is too thick it will not bake through correctly. So we want it to be like no thicker than 1/4 inch, and we can literally just press it into our cake tin. It's nice and rustic, we don't need to roll it out. Whatever works for you here, just make sure that it's as even across the cake tin as possible. My cake tin was 20 centimeters or 8 inches, so it's like, I'd say probably like a medium. Once we have pressed it correctly into our cake tin, we want to spoon the apple filling into the center, but we do not want to get too much of that juice that has really come out of those apples. And then we want to like shake the tin to try and get them nice and even. Now the latest topping, I'm just going to show you. Initially I cut my strips into like 3 centimeter pieces. I rolled them out. They were like overall the remaining third of the pastry was a bit larger than the pie dish, and then slice them into 3 centimeter or 1.18 inches thick, so because the usual apple tarts or Dutch apple pies, they have quite a thick lattice topping. I opted then to fold them all nicely, make it really nice woven for presentation's sake, but trust me, you can absolutely do it the first way I did it. And then we want to press really firmly, discard any of the excess pastry. We want to press down those edges nice and firm to get them really nicely stuck, as you see me doing here. Once we have done that, we want to place it in the oven and bake it until it's truly beautifully golden and bubbling away. So for 1 hour and 15 minutes approximately, you'll want it to look like this, but you'll want to really look out for that bubbling inside the pie. Once we have done that, we want to remove it and set it aside to cool fully. I recommend baking it the night before you want to serve it, before we try and remove the pie from that cake tin. So you can see it's quite sturdy here. We don't need to be too gentle. It is a pie that will hold its own. And when we are ready to serve it, we want to slice it nice and thick and have a decent dollop of whipped cream. because we want to shove our fork into a bit of the pie and then have a nice bit of whipped cream on our fork as well. I really thoroughly hope you enjoy this, friends.